Hello, and welcome to Lore Watch, a roundtable freeform discussion about lore and your favorite media. I'm your host, Joe Perez, one of several lore-focused folks from Blizzard Watch, and I've got my stalwart Grey Warden companion with me today, Matt Rossi. How you doing today, Matt?
Well, I didn't pick the mage origin, so at least I know I'm not related to Hawk, which is good because everybody who's related to Hawk suffers and dies.
That's fair. And chuckling in the background is our Warden Commander, Liz Harper. How are you doing today, Liz?
Hello, I'm doing well. Warden Commanders are kind of known for making terrible life choices, but hey, here I am.
I mean, you are the editor-in-chief of our website, so. So if you can't tell from that, we're going to be talking about some more Dragon Age. This is the last in our series since Veilguard has just come out, and I believe we'll be making our way through that as time allows for each of us. And we will eventually have an episode on Veilguard. But for right now, we're going to finish it off by finishing at the beginning where everything started. Dragon Age Origins. Dragon Age Origins was a game that, when it was released, honestly, it was heralded as like the next coming of like the Baldur's Gate type of series. It was filled with amazing story. It was really published, or not published. It was marketed. There's the word I'm looking for. Words are hard. I haven't had enough caffeine today. It was marketed as, a epic RPG fantasy, with many branching paths and dialogues and consequences, which, was great for the year 2009 or 2009.
Yes.
It released in November of that year, right before the holiday season, which was honestly the perfect time for most games to release, cut above the rest as far as it sort of being the hot game that season, and persisted for quite a while with a lot of DLC.
It also got, in addition to the DLC, it got a major story-based expansion 2 years after it released.
It did.
So that's this. To put this into perspective, the expansion that it got, Dragon Age Origins Awakening, came out in 2010. Mm-hmm. Almost exactly a year later, Dragon Age 2 came out. So they were working on Dragon Age 2 concurrently with that expansion, and to a degree, it shows.
Yeah,
I would also say that it's kind of insane the sort of output BioWare was doing during this time period, because Origins 2 and Inquisition came out in the period of like 4 or 5 years, including all of their DLCs. I mean, Inquisition had 3. I think Dragon Age 2 had 2 story, and Dragon Age Origins had just a ton of little DLCs.
Yeah, it had several little DLCs, and then Awakening, which was a full-on expansion.
Yeah,
it is a lot.
Huge.
And keep in mind, they were also putting out Mass Effect at the same time.
Yeah,
Mass Effect 2 came out in 2010, and Mass Effect 3 came out in like 2012, I want to say.
It astounds me how many games BioWare was putting out in this time period, and how all of them were really very good games with lots of deep story and very interconnected, intricate worlds. It's just nuts, this period in BioWare's history.
Yeah, and I think that's an artifact of that time, too, because BioWare was essentially... they had been around for years, right? They had been producing games before this. This is not their first rodeo, but this was them really sort of entering into items of a scale, I guess would be the best way to put it. They were, creating games, or at least trying to create games that would compete with MMOs, which were really big at the time. Honestly, like games like World of Warcraft, they were not exactly slouches. So you had to have a very compelling game to pull players away from that. And this was that game. And the other thing that cannot be overstated is that this is the birth of the Dragon Age lore. David Gator, who was lead writer at the time, I believe, on this, did a whole bunch of stuff to set up the story, wrote 2 books to go along with the game release as well.
Very good books, too. They're still very worth reading if you're interested in Dragon Age.
And went so far as to be popular enough to warrant an RPG, which I still have sitting on my shelf, that I only got to play once. but just a ton of people really invested in the lore. And in particular, it played on a lot of, I don't want to say a lot of tropes, because I think David would yell at me from wherever he is in the world. But it plays off of some core ideas that fantasy had been playing with at the time, in particular the Warden and the whole organization of the Wardens. The Wardens, which you are introduced to early in the game, as soon as the game happens, as you are essentially, recruited by Duncan, the Warden commander of the Ferelden Grey Wardens, on your way to travel to Ostagar, I believe is where it is, to meet with King Kalain and Terran Logain Mactir. Go ahead.
I do want to put in one thing that I thought was really, it felt innovative to me, but maybe I'm just thinking back that way. The way you could have an origin, a unique origin that really played into how and why you wound up at Ostagar. It's not just, as in the more modern Dragon Age games, where you're like, okay, I'm a human, I'm an elf. It was like, okay, I'm a city elf, I'm a Dalish elf, I'm a noble-born dwarf, I'm a commoner dwarf, and each of those had a pretty in-depth single-player story before, not huge, but before you get into this main narrative.
The dwarf ones are, in particular, actually do get to be pretty sizable.
Yeah, the dwarf one was massive, yeah.
I was running around on my commoner dwarf for an extended period of time. What's really funny is if you play the commoner dwarf, your sister is the woman that, if you play the noble dwarf, your brother impregnates.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of interesting to think about. Like, you could theoretically have a party of these people all join the Wardens at the same time, like, because they're all kind of having bad stuff happen to them at the same time. It's like, first off, when Duncan shows up in your neighborhood, almost certainly something bad's going to happen to someone around you. But yeah, you could seriously like have a Dalish elf, a city elf, 2 dwarves, and a human all be like joining the Wardens at the same time.
I think it's 2. Is it 2 humans, a noble and a commoner? Maybe I'm
no. There's no commoner human. There's a mage human.
Oh, that's right. It is a mage human.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you can play an elf or a human mage. If you play the human mage, you're actually the cousin of Hawk, as I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, a Mel.
But if you play an elf, I don't remember. You're not anybody special.
This is good, and this actually plays into something that I think I was going to talk about as well, and I wanted to bring up and see how you guys felt about it. When I say that it played off of core ideas, this is part of it, and including the Grey Wardens, or just in general, this felt like, again, almost like a D&D style background.
Oh, yeah.
Right, where you're creating your character, you have a unique backstory. That backstory dictates what you get access to story-wise, or at least your opening trajectory. And the Wardens feel like a combination of paladins as well as anti-paladins, which was really unheard of at the time. Most things were very heroic, and I believe that the way that they portrayed the Grey Wardens here is, well, for lack of a better term, very gray, right? Like it's very morally mid-ground. And I thought that was interesting.
Black Company books.
Yeah, very much so.
Where you're like, it's like, yes, we are defending the world. Yes, we are here to save people. But the thing that we're fighting is so incredibly horrible that sometimes it will be acceptable for us to let an entire busload of school kids die to stop it. Because if we don't do that, millions die. And that's the calculus we have to do. And the second part of it is that in order to beat this, we have to use it. We haven't figured out any other way to stop blights. So we're going to all have to take the blight into ourselves and shorten our lives. We know we're going to die young. We know we're going to die going insane, hearing this weird music in our heads that drags us underground to go try to find a giant dragon and wake it up. So we're going to have to, go down and get ourselves murdered by Darkspawn. And it's just all this stuff that you see later on in the series. This is the first time you get it. Mm-hmm. Like, the Wardens are just a part of it. As important as the Wardens are, and as important as the Blights are, they don't happen that often. There's like hundreds of years of history between each one.
Yeah, and usually they're major events, right? Like these are like milestones when the Blights happen.
Yeah, so
there's always Darkspawn wandering, but it's never quite the Blight.
Yeah, and so it's kind of like a fascinating way to try and set up. I actually think of it very much as anti D&D, and I don't mean that in that it is opposed to D&D. I mean like D&D is positive matter, and Dragon Age is antimatter.
Yeah, and that's kind of
it fills a lot of the same roles and niches.
Yeah,
but it does so. It's almost seriously. It's like looking at a mirror, like where instead of having the noble paladins, we have these guys who are, you can't say they're not heroic because they know they're going to die. They throw themselves into this thing to save other people, but it's very much not the bright and shiny paladins that D&D had at the time. Elves are not like an ancient race of powerful magic users. Well, they are, but they're no longer doing that. They're currently, they're either nomads or they're imprisoned. Essentially,
yeah, they're enslaved, right? Yeah,
and dwarves. There's one dwarf city that we can be completely certain still exists, and there's one that might still exist, but we're not entirely sure about those guys. They might have the Blight or something because they're weird and they don't talk to people. And then everything else has been just destroyed by the Darkspawn. And it's like, yeah, there's a lot to that. There's a lot of it feels like, I feel like to a certain degree, they first started advertising Dragon Age when they put out Neverwinter Nights.
They did.
It was in the game that and soon Neverwinter, after Neverwinter Nights, our game Dragon Age will be coming on loading screens. So I've often felt like Dragon Age is what happens when you start from D&D and then you try and move away from it. And you can see that. I'm going to shut up now so you can talk.
I agree, because that's exactly where I'm kind of going with it, is like they took sort of an identifiable core, right? Something that most folks that were interested in the fantasy genre or even in role-playing video games at the time would be familiar with, because again, you're coming off the heels of things like Neverwinter Nights was probably the largest video game ever to release with Dungeons and Dragons core until Baldur's Gate 3. And that's something that I will absolutely argue. And the people that are interested in that, like Matt said, were already being advertised, but they were absolutely going to be interested in this. And it does feel like that, where you look at what you did in D&D and you say, what can I do to make it mine? What can I do to make it different? And they do a lot of that. And I think it worked really well for them. Their relationship with magic is wildly different than sort of the high fantasy magic that folks are used to inside of like the D&D genre. Even the enemy is, and how it's constructed, is different. The relationship with the afterlife is wildly different. And all these rules are established here. My only criticism is, because of how the game was done, and you can see this as you play through it, at least at first when it was first released, is you can tell that there wasn't a super high amount of confidence in it. Partially, I think, because they weren't sure how it was going to be received, again, in a world that had mostly moved on to MMOs. And you can see that they may have taken some, I don't want to say shortcuts, but they maybe didn't give, as much leeway or freedom as one would have hoped. And also, a lot of the lore doesn't just come from in the game. A lot of it is also established in the books, and there's some stuff that is established only in the books. So I thought that was also fascinating, because we talked about this with the last one. We talked about Dragon Age 2. Dragon Age 2 is what happens when you take the handcuffs off and let somebody who's fully invested in the game world just go nuts, right? Just have no holds barred and just kind of do whatever they need to do. So, but I'm going to turn it over to you guys, and I'm going to stop talking for a while because I've talked for a bit. With this opening of the game, how do you, like, where the story goes, what do you think is the most important opening salvo, so to speak? What is the most important thing that happens first, Liz?
Ooh, I mean, it's interesting that first you go into the first encounter at Ostagar, and that kind of sets you up for the whole series. You have the heroic Grey Wardens fighting off the Darkspawn alongside a noble king who literally wears golden armor. And, the classic heroic fantasy would probably go in and have, a big victory here. Like, the heroes are all cheered, and instead it's this crushing defeat. And you get to see, what the darkspawn are, what the odds are that you're up against when they're talking, because you go into this, your character goes into this, well, kind of your character and you go into this as a new Grey Warden. You don't know you know that they exist, but you probably don't know much about them. You definitely don't know what's involved in becoming a Grey Warden, which is drinking darkspawn blood so that you kind of gain some of their power and the ability to sense them and an immunity to the blight itself.
If you survive.
If you survive, if you can drink a little bit of darkspawn blood and survive, you become more powerful. But this doesn't, right here, they've set up a lot of the universe, and they've set up, I think opinions vary a little bit. Your big antagonist, who is, walks away from the battle when he could have come in to reinforce that. And of course, I think that's Logain.
Nope.
I think later in the series that's called a little more into question about his motivations. But during Origins, he's super the bad guy.
Matt?
Honestly, I actually think it's well before Ostagar even. I think it's possibly I don't know which one you would say is the most important. I don't think that the Dalish origin is fun, but it's not super important. It just means that you end up with a warden who is a Dalish elf, and also it means that Meryl, who you will see a lot in Dragon Age 2, you get to see her for a little bit because she's in the Dalish origin of Origins. The elf one it's very interesting as this is the world that elves live in cities. The alienage life, what it's like, if you don't know a lot about the medieval period, you won't know that many cities had alienages where either Jewish people or people from, like, say, the Romani communities were imprisoned. It's a similar kind of thing, but it doesn't really matter much to the story. I think for the story, 3 of them are super important. The 2 dwarf ones, which I'm taking as one thing, just seen from 2 angles, are very important to set up Ostagar, which is the biggest chunk of content in the game.
Ostagar?
Going to Ostagar, when you go to Ostagar, Orzammar, thank you, yes. Mm-hmm. When you go to Orzammar, you spend literally twice as much time there as you do in any other of the places you end up going. Like the Mage Tower is possibly second. The Dalish thing is over in a blink. And when you go to Eamon's place, that's kind of almost as big, but it's definitely not as big as Orzammar. Orzammar, you are there forever. It takes forever to get done with all of it because you have to go do an incredibly long quest just to find somebody to help you get the people of Orzammar to mobilize on your behalf, and then you have to deal with Orzammar people and their politics, and it is crazy long, but it's also very interesting. So it's important just to get your first acclimation to Orzammar because it's going to be so important. But I honestly think that it's either the Mage Tower or the Human Noble Origin. Human Noble Origin sets up one of the major secondary antagonists of the game, Rendon Howe, he's just, first off, he's played by Tim Curry at his Tim Curryest.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It's Tim
Because this is pre-stroke Tim Curry.
Yeah. This is Tim Curry at his evil Tim Curryest.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, when Tim Curry plays a reasonable character, he's funny and urbane. When he plays an evil character, he's funny and urbane in a way that ticks you off because he's doing it at you. And Howe in this game is a spectacular villain. Much better than Logain, in fact. And Logain, even in Origins, I would argue that Logain is portrayed as somewhat sympathetic. Like he really believes he's doing the right thing. Whether or not he is, but he's not. Go ahead.
It actually took me quite a while to come around to this Logain thing because it's actually very small bits of dialogue that explain what Logain is, what his motivations are.
And they're often very easy to miss because they're just by himself.
They are. They are they're just, Logain had motivations, but they are so poorly explained and so quick that you could miss them. Ferelden is independent, but it was ruled by Orlais for a very long time. And
he and his best friend spent all the time fighting the debt-free, and then it's there.
The Logain and the previous king, Merrick, threw off their shackles and established Ferelden as an independent nation. They made a free Ferelden. Now, Merrick's son, Kalen, is facing this blight. He's fighting alongside the Grey Wardens. He has requested more Grey Warden assistance. And the extra Grey Warden assistance comes from Orlais. They're going to come in with these Grey Wardens and bring a number of Chevaliers, which are Orlesian troops. And Logain looks at this and he sees, you are inviting Orlais to take over again. Your father and I fought against this, and now you're inviting them back in? And he thinks it's preposterous. So...
And there's actually, did you do Ostagar, the Return to Ostagar DLC?
Not in a long time.
I remember this like it was yesterday.
Matt, go ahead and talk about it.
When you go back to Ostagar, there's a DLC that basically sends you back to Ostagar to see if there's anything left behind or anything you can find out about the Blight. One of the things you do is you find Kalen's letters. Mm-hmm. One of them is from Empress Celine.
Yeah.
And reading the letter, it's pretty clear that Empress Celine is saying, hey, I know you're married, but your wife can't produce you children. I mean, if you married me, our two nations could unite peaceably, and our children would be heirs to both kingdoms. Think about it. And Kalen very definitely seems to have been thinking about it, which means Kalen's wife, Honora, was Logain's daughter. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And if you bring Logain, I'm just going to give you a spoiler, guys. You can actually recruit Logain into your party.
This whole thing is spoilers. I think we're okay.
The game is old enough at this point that I think 15 years is a pretty good read. Yeah.
But at any rate, so if you bring him and he reads that letter, he'll be like, that son of a... you realize he didn't know that this was going on. He was mad just for his own reasons. He didn't realize that Kalen was literally going to push his daughter out of the throne and replace her with Empress Celine. I honestly feels like he feels justified even more after he reads that letter. It's great. It's hilarious. But I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think it's really important for Logain's...
Yeah.
And it's in a DLC, which means a lot of people didn't see it.
And Origins has so many DLCs, which makes it hard to see the whole thing for what it is and see the whole picture. And while you are playing through, certainly Logain comes across as a villain, even if you catch these little bits of dialogue coming from your perspective. They seem pretty unreasonable because you do at Ostagar, you see that Ferelden is facing a significant threat. You know Grey Wardens are the ones who can fight Darkspawn. You later learn that Grey Wardens are the only ones who can kill an archdemon because reasons. And so Logain doesn't feel justified. And in the game you see, okay, he sends assassins after you, like literal Antivan crows to kill you. He locks up his daughter. He declares himself regent and locks up his daughter.
Who is at this time still the queen.
Still the queen of Ferelden. And he also, he works with Ryndon Howe, our secondary villain, to, if you play a human noble, they murder all of your family.
Yeah,
because to take your land and prevent you from giving Kalen reinforcements. So that Kalen is weaker and easier to get rid of, I suppose. But
I think that part of it too was that he knew that if Terran Kuzlin was there, there'd be another person in the kingdom at the same level as Terran Logain, which meant that Logain wouldn't be able to steamroll everybody the way he could.
There's a bigger power struggle, so they took out the Kuzlins first, and they don't just kill the soldiers, the Terran himself. They kill your nephew, his mother. They kill everyone in the castle.
Yeah, they also try to kill your brother, but he turns out not to be dead. But
he was heading to Ostagar to help with the troops, and he was out scouting when everyone was wiped out. So he wasn't even there. You're the only one who escapes that castle. But when later you confront Howe, you have an opportunity late in the game. He talks about how, I made your mother beg me to let them live. I made her kiss my feet. And it's like, whoa, dude, you are a bad guy. There is no two ways about
killing
it.
Howe becomes almost like it's almost up there with that cyberpunk quest I've talked about once or twice where I can't get through it without killing those people. I've never even tried to spare Howe.
And
I don't even go through the conversation. Like literally, once I see him and he starts ranting, I'm like, nope, kill time. I'm not doing a dialogue with you. I've read it before, and I don't need it again. Thank you.
If you let him talk, he just becomes increasingly less sympathetic. So you look at him and you say, okay, this is the guy Loghain was working with. This is the guy who murdered my entire family and is now gloating about it in front of me. Very bad idea, because I have a sword. And, yeah, it's just rough. It's hard to see Loghain as anything but a villain coming at this as a warden. Because, of course, Loghain is against the wardens, because after Ostagar, there aren't any Ferelden wardens left except you.
And also, like, there's also an interesting thing in one of the DLCs, which is also kind of hard to talk about. When you go to Warden's Keep and you find out that the reason the wardens weren't very strong in Ferelden was that, like, about 100, 200 years ago, just before the Orlesians invaded, there was a struggle over who should be king of Ferelden, and the wardens backed somebody else, which they weren't supposed to do. Wardens are not supposed to get involved in political things, but the commander of the Warden Keep in Ferelden was like, nope, we're going to back this guy. And that guy lost, and the person who became king brought the army up and killed all the wardens.
I think being a Grey Warden involves, like, there's a requirement to make so many bad life choices. If you don't make bad life choices, you have to make one big bad life choice just to join the wardens, and after that, you kind of continue. Wardens. What's the name of the Orlesian warden that shows up? I forget. He's there so briefly.
Yeah, but he's
kind of forgettable.
One of the points he makes is that the wardens aren't like, he's like, we don't discriminate. If somebody will take the joining, we'll take them.
Yeah,
as long as we think they're
willing to accept. They're willing to accept the risk, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if they're a criminal, they're a mage, they're anything. If they will come and help fight the Darkspawn, that is all they care about.
Yeah, and they even have their own special dispensation. So if you're a mage and you don't want to live in the tower, being a Grey Warden is a way out. You can go anywhere you want now. So yeah, it's weird. The wardens really sum up the philosophy of the setting, which I believe is it's not grimdark in that way some things are, where they're just grim for the sake of it and there's dead people everywhere. The grimness in this is basically a reflection of a world where there are two paladin orders. One of them is a bunch of scrappy criminals and outcasts who are willing to drink the blood of evil and take on its taint, and they call it that. And the other are lyrium addicts who oppress mages.
It's interesting how similar they are. As you only see this later in the series, but the Templars serve the Chantry, and they're given lyrium in order to fuel their powers, just like Wardens drink Darkspawn blood. Admittedly, only once. The Templars have to keep drinking lyrium. They both have their power brought on by this thing. And in the case of lyrium, they have to keep taking lyrium. It's very addictive, and it will eventually kill them or drive them mad. And if they don't take it, same thing. It can kill you.
Yeah, so it is really interesting that they keep, like, there's both different groups like that. Yeah,
they're both making this terrible bargain for power, and I think neither of them know it before getting into it. Like, it doesn't seem to be common knowledge that Templars are all going to lose it in the end, and certainly Grey Wardens keep what the joining entails secret.
Yeah, the Wardens keep almost everything secret. They don't talk about any of this stuff. We need to, like, briefly cover the whole events of the game, right? I think a brief synopsis, but
just one thing I want to add before we go into that, because again, we only have so much time and there's so much to cover.
Yeah.
All this is to set up how broken the world is. And you don't necessarily understand why it's broken, but there are all these little tiny pieces, like, again, with the way that the political structure is, but the way that the world is, the way that the races are treated, the way that magic is handled, the way that the wardens have to exist. Why are there Darkspawn to begin with? Why is there a Blight? Like, all of these things don't make a whole lot of sense until later on as you get through the story of the game, but also as you get further into the series. And yes, part of it is that the series builds upon the lore that it set established for itself, but also, again, this was the plan all along. It was to give you little hints, and this is something that always stuck with me. When we talked with David Gator about it, it was they knew what they wanted to do. They knew the world and universe they wanted to create, and they didn't have the time to put all of it into the game at first, but they wanted to put the blocks in so that there were hints, there were whispers of it, so that when it came along later, if it came along later, it wasn't that big of a surprise and you could start connecting the dots. So, and that's what this is. It's showing you the world is broken, and we find out later why the world is broken, but the world is broken. So now I will turn it over to you, and you can give your synopsis of the events, Matt, because I think you're probably going to remember it better than most of us.
Well, I mean, with really broad strokes, various origins happen. We've kind of talked about that a little bit. Your character arrives at Ostagar with Duncan and the few remaining Ferelden Grey Wardens, and more are about to be recruited, but you have to go off into the woods first and find something. And you're not told exactly what right away. You're told as you're leaving, you're like, yeah, we need to find Darkspawn blood. And you're like, why? And he's like, yeah, well, you got to go find Darkspawn blood. This is when you're introduced to Alistair. Alistair is somebody, I think it's telling that this is when, Dragon Age is when BioWare games got good enough graphically that you could tell two characters had the same face or not. Because Callian and Alistair have the exact same face. And when you look at them, in previous games, so does every other person who isn't, all women have the same face, all men have the same face. This is like 2002, guys. But in 2009, whilst the graphics in Dragon Age Origins don't hold up, they were pretty good for the time, and you could actually tell the difference between people's faces. Duncan had a very different face from Alistair. You can make your own face, and it will be different from anybody else in the game. So when you see that Alistair and Kaelin, who you meet briefly, have the same face, that's a moment, but you don't really talk much about it. Alistair leads you. Go ahead.
I don't think you think about it either.
I thought about it, but I'm that kind of
later.
I am the kind of person who immediately goes, wait a minute, why do you have the same face? So, but you go off into the woods with like various recruits. One of them really sticks to mind is Ser Jory, who keeps talking about how he just got married and he's got this kid and he really wants to be a hero like the Wardens and make his kid proud. And he doesn't say he's
bad
2 days
idea.
He doesn't go on about how he's 2 days from retirement, but it's definitely like Jenkins in Mass Effect, where he's like, he is setting himself up. You go out into the woods, you eventually find the things you were looking for, but you're also supposed to be looking for some weird old treaties that Duncan wants. Because Duncan's like, we used to have a bunch of Grey Wardens in this area, but we don't have them anymore. And these treaties they're out there, find them because they could be very useful if this goes south. Because Duncan's always thinking ahead. But when you find the treaties, they're not there. The container is smashed, they're gone. And you meet a young lady named Morrigan, who is pretty quizzical with you. She's not exactly happy to see you, nor does she like you, but she's curious. And except for Alistair, who she immediately forms a very powerful dislike towards, and it's mutual. Alistair doesn't like her either. Depending on the kind of
depending on what story choices you make. Oh man, that's hilarious. Anyway, continue.
Depending on what kind of warden you play, you can have a bunch of different relationships with Morrigan. But here she takes you to her mother, Flemeth, and Flemeth dials the cryptic up to 500 in this first meeting. You are like, half of what you say is like a completely incomprehensible, ma'am. But I recognize, Admiral Janeway's voice, so I'm going to take you seriously. She gives you the treaties, just gives them to you. She's like, oh yeah, sure, here. Like, he's like, why did you take them then? Because I wanted to meet you.
Well,
and you're like,
she makes a point that she took them to keep them safe, and
but she definitely hints that it was actually to get them to come out.
She's certainly it's very odd. She certainly suggests that a blight endangers all of you. If she can help you, you're kind of helping her by getting rid of these darkspawn.
Yeah, and also there's a very interesting point about the chastened people, which comes in here. We've seen chastened people several times throughout the various games, but they're never really focused on. We only go to their lands once in the Jaws of Hakon DLC in the Inquisition. But here's the first time you see them, and they're like, it's actually hilarious. They didn't get the Blight is coming up from chastened lands. We never find out exactly why, other than the Archdemon might have been found down there. But the Chasten's response to it isn't to try to flee into Ferelden, but to scatter further into the mountains. So that's why the Chastened, literally the fact that the Chastened are not all over the swamp is a sign that, yes, this is a real Blight. This is not just a Darkspawn eruption. It's not just a minor thing. It's a real Blight because the Chastened aren't even trying to fight it. And they would normally not let somebody walk through their lands like this. This is all stuff that Flemeth tells you. Morrigan then takes you back to the beginning where you were, and she like leaves and gives you yet another, you were interesting, maybe I'll see you again sometime, but probably not because I hate your friend. And you go back and you give Duncan the treaties, and he's like, oh, that's weird. Thank you for the treaties. Did you get the blood? And you're like, well, yeah. He goes, okay, good. Now we can do the ritual. And so this is where we find out the whole thing about Darkspawn blood and the joining and all that. It's important to mention that this is also the first time we find out that a mage is necessary for the joining ritual.
Yes.
Because this is blood magic, which we've already been told several times, especially if you played a mage and did the mage opening, that blood magic is a terrible evil and it can never be countenanced.
It is forbidden.
I do think you miss out on the blood magic angle. Unless you play a circle mage, I think it's much less stress.
Exactly.
Like if you do that noble human thing, you don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
You don't talk about.
Magic.
Yeah, you can find out about it later from various characters, but also you do see as a warden, you can play pretty fast and loose with the blood magic thing.
Oh yeah, you can even play a blood mage. As long as you don't go around telling absolutely everyone, you can absolutely take the blood mage specialization. And if you do the DLC up in Warden's Keep, you learn how to gain new blood powers. Mm-hmm. So you're like actually using the Blight even more. But to get back to where we are, go ahead.
Yeah, there are several situations in the game where you can choose. Well, I could not do blood magic, or I could do blood magic and gain power, and that sounds pretty great. Like you have those options, and you don't back away from them. And so here's where you find out the true cost of the joining. They're doing the ritual. They're like they'll drink some. You don't just guzzle like a cup of blood of Darkspawn blood. The blood is used in this ritual, and it creates the joining beverage. They don't call it the joining beverage, but that's what it does. They use the magic to change it so that instead of infecting you, it allows you to access the Blight, because there's two reasons for it. One of which you find out here, and one of which you don't find out till later. The main reason is because people who've gone through the joining ritual can sense Darkspawn. Mm-hmm. They know where they are. They can't be surprised by them. And Alistair's already demonstrated this out in the field. Like he was like, oh, we got Darkspawn, because he can feel them. He's already been through the joining. As a result of this, when you do the joining ritual, if you succeed and survive, you will be able to hear the Darkspawn. And as you stay a Grey Warden, you'll hear them more and understand them more. It'll get to the point where you know what they're thinking. But that's dangerous, because what they're thinking is controlled by this music that comes out of the archdemons when you polite them. So yeah, there's a whole thing there. You do the rituals. Sir Jory, one of the two guys you're with, I think it's Danath, I think his name is, or Danine or something. He's a nice guy. He dies horribly. There's a reason we don't remember these characters' names. Yeah. They're there for like 15 minutes.
Yeah,
there's a decent chunk of that in this game.
Yeah. He does this whole thing. He drinks the blood, and then he dies. And Jory's like, "But I have a wife. I have a child." And he's like, Jordan and Duncan's like, "Look, we've told you the secret. We told you once we told you the secret that you can't back out. We can't let this get out there." So Jory is like, I'm not drinking that. So Duncan comes up and just kills him right in front of everyone.
I get a feeling that this is not part of the marketing when they say, come join the Grey Wardens. It's not like, once we tell you our horrible secret, you have to join or die. it's very secretive, and this is, that place where we're talking about these are not your traditional heroes. They are willing to go to some significant extremes.
Yeah, like I said, school bus full of
to
kids,
combat
not a
the
problem.
Blight. Yeah, I mean, exactly. Duncan just kills Jory and has no issue with it.
Yeah, he's like,
we move right on.
We told you the deal. You can't back out now. If you try to leave, I'm going to kill you. He tries to leave, and Duncan kills him.
Mm-hmm.
It's not dissembling. He doesn't distract him. He literally walks right up to him with a sword and jams him with it. Then they turn to you and go like, "Are you going to drink?" And you're like, "Well, I guess I might as well." And because you are the protagonist, you survive, and so now you're a Grey Warden, and
it'd be a short game otherwise.
Yeah, it'd be like a Far Cry game. Like, how there's always a Far Cry game where if you just stand there for 10 minutes, the game just ends. But so you're a warden. You go up to Talion. Well, he's with Terran Logain, and Logain's like, "This is a stupid plan. We shouldn't do this. We shouldn't do this. This is a stupid plan." And you go, "Okay, Your Highness, we're gonna go light that tower when the Darkspawn are fully committed, which will allow Terran Logain to bring his men in from behind and cut them off. And once we do that, the wardens in the front can destroy enough of the Darkspawn to break their formation." Everyone's off on the plan except Logain, who doesn't like it, but he's like, "Fine, I'll do it." And so we set off to the tower. We fight our way to this big tower at Ostagar to get up to the top, and it's absolutely infested with Darkspawn, way more Darkspawn than anybody knew about. And all the guards and stuff in the tower are dead. They've already been killed by Darkspawn, which is like, wait, how did the Darkspawn even know about this tower to do this?
Yeah.
Like, what's going on? This definitely feels like a real Blight. Because Kaelin keeps going, "I don't even think this is a Blight. I just think, but you're getting signs, no, this is a Blight, all right." You get to the top, and you manage to light the beacon, which means at that point, Logain should swing into action, and the Darkspawn should be crushed. And they still could be, because at this point, most of the Wardens are still alive. He doesn't do anything. He just sits there and watches. And
he calls the retreat. He calls for them to retreat.
Yeah, and so when he does that, the Wardens are outnumbered by just waves of Darkspawn and are killed, including Duncan, and including King Kaelin, who is also killed right there on the field of battle. The only survivors are you and Alistair, because you were in the tower, and because Flemeth showed up and got you out of the tower. And she doesn't directly admit that she did this, but it later comes out that she basically turned into a dragon to get you out of the tower. Yeah, she can turn into a dragon. So you wake up in the swamp. Morrigan's there. She's like, "Yeah, my mother saved you. Your king's dead. Your army's gone. You two are the last Grey Wardens, or I'm sorry, you and the idiot are the last Grey Wardens. I'm coming with you, and we're gonna go and try and save all this." Point
of order.
Yeah, she didn't actually know. Yeah,
Flemeth sends Morrigan with you, and Morrigan is surprised when Flemeth says this. Morrigan did not expect to be kicked out of the house, essentially.
Although she does kind of take to it after a little while, but yeah, you're right.
She does take to it, but when Flemeth first brings it up, she is surprised, and it surprises me in context also, but that's another story.
Yeah, I have theories about that, but we don't have time. From here, I'm gonna put it on speed mode. You go from Ostagar, you head up to a little town called Lothering. And if you remember the previous podcast we did on Dragon Age, the sequel to this game starts in Lothering with the Darkspawn army advancing. You get there before the Darkspawn do in this game. So you get to Lothering. They know the Darkspawn are coming. They know they need to get the heck out of there. Although some of them are not retreating. They're like, they're not. It's like they can't deal with the idea of losing their homes, which is understandable, but you guys got to go. You're going to die.
We see that even in modern times with
absolutely.
When natural disasters coming through, people are warned and they stay anyway. It's home. So that's pretty relatable.
A war comes through an area, suddenly the people are in the war zone, but it's like, where were we supposed to go? We didn't have anywhere to go.
Yeah.
So that's kind of happening in Lothering. You run around doing a bunch of various quests where you might recruit Leliana, who is pretty convinced that she can talk to the Maker, who is God in this setting. For the people who worship the Andrastian faith, which is based around the prophet Andraste, who loved the Maker so much that she let herself be put on a pyre and immolated for him. But one of the the people who were burning her, the Tevinter mages, had a sudden swell of pity and stabbed her so she wouldn't have to burn to death, because it's pretty awful. Also, Sten, a Kunari who doesn't have horns, which to you at the time, this is your first Kunari. Yeah. You don't know Kunari is supposed to have horns, so you're not surprised. Like it's like, okay, whatever.
I will say there's another Kunari in Origins who also does not have horns. I think the only other Kunari you see, he's in Awakenings. In Awakenings, I think.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant the mercenaries you can fight in this game. There are Kunari mercenaries you can fight.
Oh, yeah. There's like a vendor kind of in a Darkspawn area in Awakenings who is a Kunari and also does not have horns. He uses the same model as Sten.
Yeah, pretty much. Sten doesn't have horns, and that's not a thing anyone says anything about at the time. I think, however, there is one, what do they call it, entry, journal entry or whatever, where you can read, codex entry. There's a codex entry where you can read that they have horns. And that if they don't have horns, it's a big deal. But I don't remember if that's actually in this game or in Awakening.
I don't think it is. I think it's an Awakening.
Yeah. But anyway.
I think they just changed their minds and thought they looked cooler with horns in Dragon Age 2. That's my personal thought.
But so anyway, you get through Lothering, you recruit at least those two. On the road, you meet an assassin named Zevran. You
can also leave Sten to his fate. You can
leave both of them behind. Yeah. You don't have to bring either of them. But you can recruit those two. I always recruit both. You then find out that an assassin named Zevran tries to kill you. This is where you find out that Loghain has hired people to kill you. If you take out his forces, you can recruit him. If you don't then actually get him to like you, he will betray you later. But, quite frankly, I was amazed Zevran had a possibility of not betraying me. I was like, why did we trust this guy again?
Why not? He was there.
He's there. No, he did another romantic interest. There just weren't enough.
But you also find out that Loghain has put a bounty on all Grey Wardens. Loghain has, you're all to be arrested and imprisoned if you are found.
His name was Riordan. That's the Grey Warden from Orlais. Sorry, guys. Anyway, I'm trying to basically from here you decide, okay, we have to go find allies because Loghain has a stranglehold on the assembly. He's got he's basically squatting there like an idol, and we can't get rid of him by ourselves. So you head over to where Arl Rendon Howe doesn't live. Different guy. Eamon. Arl, Eamon.
This is where those treaties come in handy because the Wardens had treaties where they could call on different groups for aid. So you the rest of the game is kind of like, okay, I'm going to go here and ask these people for aid. I'm going to go here and ask these people for aid because I have these treaties.
And partially you go try to get Arl Eamon Garen as your ally because Alistair lived with him for most of his life. He was raised there. He was like some kind of weird ward, and Alistair doesn't really know the details, but he knows that he grew up there, and he believes at the time that he was the son of like a washerwoman who for some reason left him there. It's a weird story, but it basically turns out that none of it's true, and they've been telling him the truth for at least a few years. Like he just kind of sticks his fingers in his ears.
Father is. Yeah.
He sticks his fingers in his ears and goes blah blah blah. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to talk about it. But you get in there, and amongst the things, Arl Eamon does agree to help you if and once you save him from his own son, who has summoned a demon to try and cure him from a wasting disease that he contracted. It's very complicated.
A wasting disease that he contracted because Loghain hired someone to poison him.
Yeah.
So this is another place where you see Loghain really acting like the bad guy because he took out the Kuzlans with Arl Howe, and then he took out Arl Eamon by sending someone to poison him, even before everything else. Yeah, a blood mage. So this is actually if you didn't play a mage, this is actually kind of that first time you see, blood magic is really bad, huh?
Yeah, but so you get through all that stuff. I'm really trying to flip this down, and it's really hard. You fight your way through a bunch of undead being raised by the demon. You successfully you kill Connor, you lobotomize Connor, or you save Connor. There's 3 different ways that can go. But in order to do any of that stuff, you have to go after you've beaten the demon. You have to still go to the Circle of Magi.
Well,
and no, you have to get the Circle of Magi first because that's the only way you're getting that thing out of Connor's head. Remember, after you fight your way in,
you can. You can also use the mage to do a blood magic ritual to get the demon out.
Oh,
but it
right.
will kill someone, in this case, his mother.
Yeah. Okay. So
and
that's,
she volunteers. She volunteers to do it. Or you can get the Circle of Magi to come and cure him. Or you can just kill him and be done with it.
Yeah. So different origins here, but I'm gonna go with the assumption that you go to the Circle of Magi, so I can break that one down for you quickly. You go to the Circle of Magi, but the Magi are currently having demons everywhere because this guy named Ulfred. Is it Ulfred or Ulrich? I can't remember his name.
Regardless,
but he basically has been told by Loghain that he and his mages can be free of the circle if they'll follow him and back him up during the Blight.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, yeah, let's do that. We can finally not have to listen to the Templars. So,
like, all of these things tie back to Loghain in various ways. Loghain had already set all of this in motion to consolidate power and get rid of people who might object to his rule.
So after you deal with that, either you basically back the Templars and kill all the mages, or you get the Templars and the mages to be like nice, and then you get the mages as your allies. You go off to the Dalish. That one's real simple. Do you work with the Dalish, or do you work with werewolves that want to kill the Dalish, or do you find out that the werewolves are only werewolves because the keeper of the Dalish clan cursed them to be werewolves because a human did something bad to his son or daughter? Was it his daughter? I forget.
It's his daughter.
It's his daughter. It's dark.
It's very dark.
It's dark. It's dark, but also he's been holding this curse on them for like 100 years or something.
I mean, these are people who never even met the guy that he's mad at this point. Because he does it to every human that he sees, like, everyone from that area. But anyway, you can cure, you can either get werewolves, you can get Dalish elves, or you can get Dalish elves without having to do anything to the werewolves. But anyway, you go there, you do that. You go to Orzammar, and as we talked before, you have to get the dwarves to say, well, we don't have a king right now. We need somebody who can basically stand up and tell us that we should do this. And as a result, there's only one person who can, because there's only one living person who is a paragon. And a paragon in dwarf culture is like a living exemplar of the dwarvish people. They can do anything. They can come. And so you go looking for this paragon. Go ahead, Liz.
Like, the thing is, there are two candidates up for king, and neither of them can get enough advantage to, claim the throne. So you've got to go searching for this paragon, who that's also a place where it gets very dark.
Yes.
Dark.
And it's really funny about that is that one of the paragon that's missing, Branka, her husband, Ogren, is a completely useless alcoholic maniac. And I don't know why the two of them got married. There's some setting that they were young and in love, and then he just each grew into the thing that they are. She became a paragon of her people, and he became just this horrible thing. But you can recruit him, and he's kind of funny. I'll give him that. He's fun companion to have around. He's voiced by Steve Bloom.
There's these little hints that they really care about each other. Deep inside and very hidden.
Well, that's why he goes. He doesn't go just because he goes because, whether or not, she's a high and mighty paragon, whether or not, she's completely obsessed, she is his wife, and he cares enough that he's going to go find her. You go in, there's a lot of stuff with the Darkspawn here that is just way too disturbing.
I mean, she's vanished into the deep roads, and no one even knows if she's alive, frankly.
Yeah, but you go in, when you finally get through all this, including a really disturbing section where you find out how Darkspawn are quote unquote made, the Darkspawn broodmother bit in this is just horrific. It's
awful.
And Branka has been giving them dwarves so that they leave her alone. Isn't that right?
Yep.
Yeah, she's been sacrificing her followers one at a time.
Because, and again, this is another one of those instances of somebody doing the calculus. She's like, well, yeah, okay, I'll lose the various followers that joined my house when I became a paragon. But if I get this thing I'm doing done, then we'll just destroy them. We'll finally be able to destroy the Darkspawn once and for all. And what you find out is the paragon Cairden originally invented these things called golems. And the golems are basically gigantic constructs with the souls of dwarves put in them.
Mm-hmm.
Which, that is something no one knows. She's gone in here looking for this anvil that they know Karin used to create golems. But no one realizes that he could only create golems by infusing them with the soul of a dwarf, and that he took and executed these dwarves to fuse them into this golem. And he will talk about, at first, it was volunteers, and it was criminals and the poor, and, it's just...
the goalpost changed because it kept being, we need more.
They needed golems.
Yeah, because that was the only way they were holding off the Darkspawn. And Thedas finally was like, they did it to him when he protested. He's like, we can't just grab people and put them in these things. So they did it to him.
Now Caridan, you find Caridan. You weren't looking for Caridan. He should be long, long dead. But there he is as a golem.
Yeah. And you're given a choice. You can help Branka kill Caridan and give her the anvil of the void where she can start churning out golems.
To help you.
Which will be great for you because you'll have an army of, practically indestructible golems to help you against the Darkspawn. Or you can help Caridan, which means you have to kill Branka with her husband right there, and he's like trying desperately to talk her out of it. Like, he does not want to fight her. He's like, please stop this. And eventually you come down to it. Which one do you support? One of them dies. And if you support Branka, Caridan dies. If you support Caridan, Branka dies.
This is another thing where Branka's already done the math. Branka is willing to sacrifice dwarves if this means she can reach her goals and start making these golems.
Man, we didn't even talk about Shale at all.
No, but Shale is a DLC character, so you might not have even seen her. And that's sad, because Shale is really... But if you bring Shale here, there's a great bit with Caridan, where Caridan knows everything about Shale, even though Shale doesn't remember herself.
Yeah, because Caridan is the one that made Shale.
Yeah. Anyway, so you can... I usually pick Caridan. I picked Branka once just to see what happens. But either way, these are two paragons. Caridan is a paragon, just like Branka was. Either way, they will make a crown. And you take that crown back to the assembly, and the assembly's like, oh, that crown must be made by a paragon. And so
seems like that's an assumption, but there you go.
Yeah, and the best part is now you can walk in, and you who, unless you're playing a dwarf, you know nothing about these people or their culture really, can just pick who you want to be king. The sneaky little conniving son of the previous king, who is absolutely right about everything he's saying about their culture, but he is a guy who also framed his own brother for murder and murdered somebody to frame his brother for the murder. And the person he murdered was his own father. No, not his father. It was his older brother. The older brother was the one who was going to inherit. The middle brother is your character if you play the dwarf from the noble background. And this guy is your youngest brother. And he kills your oldest brother and frames you for it, so that your father will have no choice but to have him as his heir.
This is one of those things. If you played a specific origin, you are going to have some serious opinions about this. But if you played a human or an elf, you have no idea. You're just like, okay, I like this guy. I like this guy. Done.
Yeah, it's complicated. But if you pick Haramont, then the dwarves become insular, and they basically are like, we'll help you, but then we're going to close our gates and not let anybody in here ever again. And if you pick Balin, who is the one that did the horrible thing of murdering his older brother and framing his middle brother, he wants to have relations with the surface, and he wants to have good trade, and he wants to be he wants the dwarves to be part of the world again. So it's like, this will be better for everyone except me. It's really, you can even help him get his son approved. It's it is messed up. Anyway, so you're done. When you've been to these places, you go back, you get Arl, Aemon Gurin, and you get him, undemonied at this point.
There is one other step to that Aemon quest, which is you have to go find the Urn of Sacred Ashes, which is the only way to cure him.
And this is how
this poisoning.
This is how the game really lays out the Andrastian religion for you, because the Urn of Sacred Ashes are the ashes of Andraste, because Andraste was from Ferelden. So that's what this entire religion started in Ferelden, which is hilarious that it's coming from Orlais. The chantry is based in Orlais, but the actual Andraste lived in Ferelden. So you go through this town where all the chantry. The thing is, in the rest of the game, all the chantry is women. There's no men in positions of authority. It's all women. The chanters, because the head of the religion, the figurehead of the entire religion, was a woman. So they don't let men be priests or chanters, I think they're called here. There's a few, like there's men in some roles, but most of it's like they have men who are the equivalent of nuns. But for the most part, all the priestesses, they're women. When you get to this village, you know something's off immediately because there's a man in charge of the chantry here. So you get up there, there's a guy in charge of the chantry, that's bad, you kill him, you go into the place, you find out all sorts of weird stuff's going on in there, there's dragons claiming to be involved. You eventually find the actual temple, which you will see again in Inquisition, because it's the Temple of Sacred Ashes. You find it, there's a whole bunch of stuff involving the Andrastian religion in there, specifically, but at the end you find the urn and you take some of the ashes. Not a lot, you don't grab the urn and leave with it. You just take some of the ashes and you go ahead.
This is also a point at which Liliana can die if you decide to corrupt the ashes, and you can have to fight Liliana, which is awkward when you get to Dragon Age Inquisition, where she's a major character.
Yep. But anyway, you get down there, you cure Aemon. Aemon's like, look, we can't do this unless Alistair is willing to step up and be king. That's the only way. We don't have any other candidate to put up there unless we produce Marek's other son. Like that's it. Alistair's like, I don't want to do it. And then there's a quest line where you can deal with someone who claims to be his sister and totally isn't. And you can either get him to be like, dude, buck up and be a king, or you can be like, all right, just be you. Just be like you are. You're fine. But we'll go in there and we'll figure if we can see some other way out of this. And if you're dating Alistair at the time, this has ramifications. You go to Denerim, which is the capital, which is where the Landsmeet will be happening. And Loghain manages to. Oh, I know, honey. I gotta go. I gotta get through this. Go ahead and say it.
I mean, the Landsmeet is a big meeting of all of the nobility of Ferelden, at which Earl Aemon has said, okay, we need to get everyone together, we need to challenge Loghain, and we need to get him out of power, and then we can unite Ferelden to defeat this blight.
It's an attempt to end essentially the Ferelden civil war that's been happening this entire time.
And so you get there almost immediately. After you do some things to gather support, Queen Anora contacts you through one of her people. And, Arl Eamon's like, that's great. Why does the queen want to talk to us? And you find out that Taron Loghain imprisoned her, his own daughter, because she was like, what happened with Kaelin? Why isn't Kaelin here? Why did Kaelin die? Why did you let Kaelin die?
Where's my husband?
Yeah. Dad, you left with my husband and you came back with nobody. So through a series of events, you go and get Anora, but in the process, you can get captured.
Yep.
If you don't fight the guards that are there at the end, everybody but you gets out, but you get arrested. Or if you're like me, you tried to get out of this a few times, kept getting murdered because there's like a million archers, and then realized I can just run back at the hallway and pull them in one at a time and kill them right here. And they'll be getting hit by all the AoE magic. So that's what I did. So yeah, I didn't have the prison break scene, but there's a prison break scene if you don't do that. If you, however, manage to talk Sir Cothrian around, when you get to the Landsmeet, after you escape, Anora makes a deal like, you support me and I'll support you. You make sure you get me like on the throne and I'll help you. And you don't want Alistair as king. Trust me. There's nothing wrong with Alistair. I don't hate him.
She doesn't even. Yeah. No one knows Alistair. He's not been raised for leadership.
She straight up tells you that she knows who he is. She always has.
Yep.
But she's like, there's nothing wrong with the man. He's not a bad man. I don't know him very well, but I've had him watched. He just isn't king. We need a king, and quite frankly, I've been doing the job the whole time Kaelin was king.
Yeah, but I mean, you can sort of, one of the things you can do is make the arrangement where like that still happens. Go ahead.
Yeah. When you get to the Landsmeet, there's a whole bunch of things that can happen here, but basically it comes down to either you or somebody else fights Loghain, and the somebody else is Alistair. If Alistair fights Loghain, he will not spare him under any circumstances.
Correct. Because
Loghain is responsible for the death of Duncan, who to Alistair was more of a father than anybody else. So he will not spare him. And since he will not spare him, Anora will not agree to the big possible conciliation move you can do here. So he ends up, either he just says, no, I'll be a Grey Warden, or he becomes king by himself. If you're playing a female warden that dated him, you can, if you are the human noble, you can marry
a human
him.
noble, only a human noble.
Yeah, a human noble can marry him. An elf, or I guess a dwarf, although I don't know any dwarves that did this. I never romanced him on a dwarf, but an elf or a mage, they can be his consort, but they don't actually
Yeah, you can't be queen.
Yeah, but you can be queen if you're the Kuzland, you can be his queen. Yeah. But you can also negotiate for Nora just to become queen. You can still, if you don't kill her father, if you fought him and then you spare him, and we're going to get to that. If you spare him, then Nora can become queen. And if you're the male Kuzland, you can marry Nora because she's like, oh, you're technically the Terran then, aren't you? Because at this moment they don't know your older brother's still alive. This makes you basically the next best thing to a king. Marrying you would it would basically unify the kingdom, just like the other way around. So you can do that, or you can convince Alistair and Honora to get married. You can talk them both into it.
Yeah, and you basically convince it by Alistair saying, or telling the Alistair, you don't worry about it. She's going to take care of everything. You don't have to worry about this. You can still go fight and do whatever. But this is part of your duty. Again, Matt said it, it's kind of buck up and just accept this.
Yeah.
But the other interesting thing that Matt didn't talk about is if you are the one that fights Loghain, there is a third option that you can actually go through.
Yeah, I just said I was going to get to it.
Yeah. But I know, but I think it's one of the most interesting options and it's the one that I don't know why, but I always take. After you defeat him, go ahead.
It has the most impact on the story to come, I think.
I would agree, and I also think it makes the most amount of sense. One of the things you can do is you can force him to become a Grey Warden. You can force him to go through the joining. And I always find it slightly poetic because he spent so much time hating the Grey Wardens, and now he has to be one. Because, again, spoilers, he survives. He becomes a Grey Warden, and he will be there at the final battle to assist you.
That's not all he'll do to assist you.
Go ahead.
After you get done with the lands meet, whoever's in charge, whoever's king now, king or queen, they say, okay, enough of this BS. Get ready. The Darkspawn are coming. Get everything together. You're in charge now, warden person. Get out there and stop this.
You now have the unified might of Ferelden behind you now that there's no longer civil war. And
all of your allies as well. All the possible werewolves and golems, whoever you recruited. Your forces get together, but that night, while you're doing all that, Morrigan comes to you. First off, Riordan comes to you and says, look, I need to get into this building in Denerim before we do anything else. You take him there, and it's where the Grey Warden stockpile of blood is. So they have a bunch of Darkspawn blood that's already been magically treated, so they can make more wardens. That's how you get Loghain as a warden.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got Loghain as a warden, Alistair won't come with you.
Yeah, you lose Alistair for sparing him.
Either he's the king, in which case he's like, I'm not going, or he's still a warden, but he takes off and is a drunken mess.
He's out.
Yeah, so he's not there. So either Loghain or it's Alistair with you. Riordan comes to you and goes, look, we need every advantage we can get because here's what's going to happen. There's a reason I insisted that we bring Loghain in. If somebody who's not a warden kills the archdemon's soul will just go into the nearest Darkspawn corpse, and boom, it'll just turn into a new archdemon,
basically making them functionally immortal.
Yeah, they can't. This is why in the first Blight, we killed the archdemon like 16 times. It didn't matter. We'd kill it, and it would just be back. It wasn't until we found out about the wardens we realized if a Grey Warden kills the archdemon's soul will go into you because your blood is tainted.
Mm-hmm.
And if it does, you will die.
Both die.
And so will it, because its soul and your soul will explosively destroy each other. There's not enough room there for two souls. Boom, you're gone. So not only will you die, you will completely cease to exist. Your soul will be gone. There will be nothing left of you in any world. here or hereafter. Nothing. This is the true sacrifice of wardens.
Yeah, and this is why they never tell you that this is going to happen, because you would sign up for that.
They only tell you this when it's time, because So you're hit with this knowledge, and you're like, well, all right, we'll definitely think about which one of us is going to do that tomorrow. And if you have Logain with you, he's like, let me do it. Like, I've got, I did this. This is on me that it got this bad. Let me do this. And if it's Alistair, he'll be like, well, you shouldn't have to die for this, so I'll do it. And you're like, you can say yes or no, but whatever. But Morrigan then shows up. And if you've been romancing Morrigan, which I think you can do as a woman, but I'm not sure. I know you can as a man, though.
Only male.
Okay. So if you've been romancing Morrigan...
If you are a woman, you have to try to convince somebody else to bear the child, which is another warden, or depending on what you do with Alistair. Sorry, the child. You could also be Alistair. Yeah,
it can be Alistair or Logain.
Yep.
Which is even funnier. I did the Logain one once just to see it. It's hilarious. He's like, I haven't been with a woman since my wife died 30 years ago, and you want me to do this? And you're like, oh, well, I guess it's for Ferelden. He's like, he goes in there and he's so awkward. He's got this look on his face.
Can we also just take a moment to just not downplay how creepy it is? Because you're just kind of like there for the thing.
Yeah, it's all bad. This is definitely not something that's great. But if it's you who does the siring, which is the case for me, because at the time I played a dude war, you have sex with Morrigan, or somebody else has sex with Morrigan, because she was sent for this purpose. This is the actual reason that her mother sent her. Because the archdemon's soul, if it was purged of the taint, would be the soul of an old god. It'd be the soul of a dragon, not a blight-infested monster. And they want to do that. They want to rescue this old god soul because it is an old god. It's this connection to a part of Ferelden's and the world's history that's been lost. Think about all the things that soul experienced. Go ahead, Liz.
At this point, you do not see Flemeth's hand in it.
She tells you her mother sent you for that reason, though. Morgan does. She does tell you that.
It largely depends on the choices you've made with her, because there are playthroughs that I've had where Morgan does not reveal that.
Yeah, in my playthrough, she did. So regardless, your choices here is, no, we're not going to do that. One of the wardens will die. Okay, I'll do that. Whether or not you and I have even been romantic, if I'm male, I will do that. Or if I'm female, I need to talk the other wardens into doing this. I think you can talk Riordan into it too.
I don't remember, but I think you're correct.
Yeah, it can be Riordan or it can be Logain. But regardless, whoever it is, it's creepier if you're the female warden talking somebody else into doing it, because then you're still there watching it.
Yeah.
It's like, what am I, sitting in the corner in a chair? Why do I have to be here for this? I'll just take your word for it.
There is a stipulation, though, that Morgan makes afterwards that once the child is born, that you or the child's father, if there is another one that you've convinced to do so, do not follow them or go after them or try to seek anything for the child ever again. That has story implications later. But once that's done, that essentially is you're either going to reject the ritual, in which case Morgan leaves the party. You're going to have somebody else do it, or you're going to do it, which then leads to the final battle, which is the Battle of Denerim. Go ahead, Liz.
And of course, the thing here is that by creating this child, the child will absorb the old god soul, and no one has to die, and she will have a child with the soul of an old god.
Well, they believe that
the child will not actually,
They believe that the child will have the soul of an old god freed of the darkspawn corruption.
Yeah, but this ritual she's doing makes it to where this child could absorb the soul of the old god instead of a warden, thus letting the warden survive killing the archdemon.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you fight your way through Denerim. You get to the building that the archdemon is currently roosted on top of. After Riordan jumps off of a building, lands on the dragon's wing, and rips it in half with a dagger, so it can't fly anymore. But it's still a gigantic dragon, so it kills him. But it's stuck up on the top of this tower because its wingspan's all messed up and it can only do short hops. So you're now like, okay, we have to get up that tower. You run through fighting all these darkspawn until you get to like the second to last floor where Sandal is waiting for you. We didn't talk about Sandal very much in this episode, so you just have to trust me.
There may be an ancillary episode before we get to Veilguard. We'll see.
Yeah. Anyway, Sandal's up there. Sandal has been doing enchantments for you this entire time, which means he puts like various stuff on your weapon. And his dad, Bodon, has been selling you the potions or poultices and all that stuff that you've been using to keep from dying. They're pretty cool. You help them out from some Darkspawn, then they start following you around and doing that for you. But when you get there, Sandal, who talks very strangely and is often somewhat preoccupied and says, I think 9 times out of 10, what he says is enchantment. You get to the top of the tower and there's like 100 dead Darkspawn around this one dwarf.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, Sandal, how did you get here? Enchantment.
And he's covered in blood.
Covered in it. Just swimming in blood.
Not super unusual in this game franchise. If you have any fight with anything, you're probably covered in blood. But yeah.
So you don't ever get any answers from Sandal as to how he did this, but you do manage to like, he's brought Bodon's goods with him, so you can finally do your last purchase of various healing and magic items like lyrium potions. You can buy any items he has that you actually think would be useful, and you can get anything you found on your way up enchanted. And then you go through the door and you fight the Archdemon, and the Archdemon fight is a pita. It is such a pita. It is World of Warcraft levels of running around.
And micromanagement, because you're managing the entirety of the party at this point. Yeah. But once you do defeat the Archdemon, basically that's it. Upon its death, the Darkspawn flee the battlefield and you end the 5th Blight. Now, there are DLCs that happen and come after this, which we're not going to talk about here. But everything that this game does feels grand, right? Like it's large scale for what games at this time were doing. And it set the groundwork. Thankfully, it was successful enough that it set the groundwork for the entire franchise that we've seen set before us. Dragon Age 2 came and was absolutely phenomenal. Regardless of what anybody says, ignore the caves. Dragon Age Inquisition really flesh out a lot of the stuff, particularly with the Fade, and giving you sort of the backstory of that, and the elves as well, giving you more meat on those bones. And now
they also
Veilguard
had the best DLC of any Dragon Age game.
Quite possibly.
Trespasser is an amazing deal.
And now we have Veilguard, which is carrying on that torch, and I'm looking forward to seeing how that plays out, because I'm going to be playing it soon, hopefully. And hopefully we all will talk about it there. But this game did a lot. It was very ambitious. It created in my opinion, a very provocative world. It took things that were familiar and made it their own. In a lot of ways that we talk about, like creating your own stories and things like that or tabletop games and experiences. It was just overall a great experience. And I don't know about you guys, but I put probably close to 1,000 hours into this game. And that's not a joke. Like, if I look at Steam, I'm pretty sure like I have like stupid amounts of time in this game. Because everything you did, and this is something that Liz talked about earlier, and I think it cannot be overstated, there are so many different variables and variations on how you can get to that endpoint that there's so much to experience it. And if you listened to our Fallout episodes, it's like that. It's like that level of your cascading choices, whether it's losing companions, gaining companions, how you alter the story, how you leave the world of Ferelden behind you. And yes, as the game moves forward, there are canonical endings or canonical plot points. That's just something you have to accept as a game moves into a franchise where the story continues onward. But it was just phenomenal, especially at the time in 2009, to see a game that really gave you consequences to your actions and choices.
A game where you could die.
A game where you could die.
And that's the canonical ending of the story. If you do certain things, your character steps up and kills the Archdemon, and there's no baby, there's no ritual, you die. Mm-hmm. And you don't just die, your soul just died. Like, there's nothing left of you. And I wanted to make sure that Liz got a chance to talk about it, because Liz had mentioned something about Origins that I thought was really interesting. Because if you combine the Origins at the beginning of this game with the stuff that happens in the game and the final choices you make, you end up with a lot of points that can be like in a matrix of possible endings to this game. So Liz, what was it you were talking about earlier? You said something about talking about choice and consequence in this game.
I mean, it feels like there's a whole game in playing each of the Origins here. That almost like you have to go back and play each of the Origins, to Joe's point about putting 1,000 hours in the game, because each one approaches the story in a different way. And there are so many big choices you can make that are going to be informed in different ways, depending on the background you picked. And it just kind of creates this fascinating tapestry of, choices that seem very consequential when you make that. And as you go through the series, it feels like they become just a little less consequential. But while you're playing the game, it feels like a big deal to choose Bronca or Caradon. Do you want a Golem army, or do you want a dwarven army and cost all these dwarven lives? Both of them cost dwarven lives. Everything you do feels impactful here, and it feels big in setting up the universe and in setting up the kinds of choices you're going to make moving forward.
Yeah, and it really does set that bar. And again, like, it's deliberate. It's not accidental. It's not lightning in a bottle. It was always the game plan. It was always sort of like the goal to have this sprawling, large world that could infinitely be built upon. And in terms of, I know people still to this day throw around retcon as a very negative thing. Dragon Age is very little of that, actually. Like, going back through it, going through all the stories, like, listen to all our episodes. While there is canonical points and there are fixed points in the storyline, there's not a lot of revision. There's not a lot of going back, because a lot of it was just planned out from the beginning. I don't know how that's going to play out with Veilguard, but at least up until that point, like, everything is either just building off of something but doesn't erase what happened beforehand, and just sort of like builds what feels like, and maybe this is just me and my love of this franchise, it feels like a living world. It feels like a world that evolves as the story moves forward, as things happen. It feels like a story in which grand consequences and major events do have impact and aren't just erased. And I really do enjoy that, which is one of the reasons I think, I don't know for both of you, but I know for me, like, I'll go back and play these games because, again, it has that sort of feel that many other games just don't come close to even today. But I think we're running out of time here. We've gone a little bit long, and I know how much you all love that, but I'm going to throw this over for final thoughts on anything doing with this particular game or Dragon Age in general, and I'll let Liz go first.
I mean, this sets the stage for a huge franchise. I think, while I think you can play any of these games on their own, they become so much bigger when you play one into the other, because each establishes different parts of the world, different characters. This really establishes the Grey Wardens, but then there's a lot you don't learn about the Wardens until you get to Inquisition, and you get to that whole sub-quest over there. Every game builds on what the last game did, but not necessarily linearly. It shows you a different part of the world, which will change your perspective on the rest of it. Almost like those origin quests in Dragon Age Origins, where, depending on which you pick, you'll look at the world in a different way. So I think this is part of what has become an amazing franchise, a whole that is larger than the sum of its parts, with all of its interlinking narratives and characters and organizations.
Matt?
I think one of the things to think about when you think about Dragon Age Origins as a story is to think about how it basically exists to avoid what I used to call the Zanisha problem. There's a lot of exposition in this game, but the exposition is often delivered literally just before or just after you've experienced something that will need some exposition. It's not just there because we want to tell you everything about the world. No, it's you need to know about blood magic, and if you didn't play the Mage Origin, you still gotta know about it. So here's a book about blood magic you'll find, and then suddenly you're in that basement with that blood mage that that almost killed Connor's father. Like, okay, even though I don't know who you are because I didn't play the Mage Origin, I still know blood magic is bad. And that's important because I'm about to talk to you and maybe make a deal for you to do something. There's a lot of, I don't want to say, like I said before, it's kind of like a Matrix. Like when Liz talks about how it's almost like playing the game from a different origin gives you an entirely new experience of the game.
Yeah.
one of the problems of doing that kind of thing in games is that you sometimes have these encounters that don't really feel important until you do the other stuff. So in a way, the fact that Origins is as good as it is almost in spite of this decision.
Agreed.
That they had to fight against this decision in order for it to be rewarding. There had to be strain to it. And I definitely think that strain shows. The storytelling in Origins is still chunky compared to the storytelling in 2, where the storytelling is always really good, but sometimes the actual gameplay can be significantly weird. Like, I'll never get over the fact that in Kirkwall, if like 100 ninjas are living on rooftops around you, only 10 will come down. The other 90 will sit there and wait. Oh, nope, he's killed all our friends. Jump down another 10. It's like, no, just all come down at once. Either you kill me or I kill you, but please stop doing that. I think to a degree, the story of Dragon Age has been consistent for as long as it has been because of how good the foundation was here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And my final thought is play the game, right? Like it's while it is 15 years old at this point, it is well worth playing with all the DLCs. You can often pick it up for a song, and you will not be disappointed. The gameplay may be a little bit dated in some parts, but I think that the story and the world that's crafted from it makes it well worthwhile. I will also say that if you are inclined to read, I know everybody feels a little bit differently about what they read, but in particular, if you are interested in fantasy with a darker side to it, maybe a little grimdark, but not, I wouldn't really call it grimdark. Read the 2 books. It's a little bit lighter. It's still dark. But I would say go back and read those as well. And I believe that those books were, and it's been a while. Please remind me if you remember what they were.
I don't remember the names. No. I can literally break down the plot for you, but I can't remember the names. What is the Silent something?
I think it was the Stolen Throne and the Calling, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Yeah, that is correct.
Those. So they're written by David Gator. There was actually 4 books, and these were all written by him. The Stolen Throne, The Calling, I think it was Asunder, and then The Masked Empire. Read them. They're well worth your time. They give you such deeper roads and meanings into the games, even if you don't want to play the games. And they're just very incredibly well written. I cannot stress that enough. And I usually don't say that very often about fantasy or game tie-in novels. Liz?
You know that I am not usually on these shows, but Dragon Age is a special one for me. I usually cannot go through a video game tie-in novel. I don't find many of them very compelling. Mm-hmm. These are just good novels. These are great. They have the Liz seal of approval for whatever that's worth. They
acknowledge that the games exist without making them about the games, if that makes sense. Mm. Right, which is what makes them really, really interesting. And if you are so inclined to pick up a little piece of history, if you can find it, highly recommend picking up the Dragon Age role-playing box, because it was not a full book release. It was a box release that they released. It was only available at, I believe, Barnes & Nobles across the country, at least in North America. I don't know where elsewhere in the world. But if you're into tabletop RPGs, highly recommend that as well. There were little tidbits of lore in that as well that you didn't get anywhere else. They weren't critical or crucial, but if you are definitely interested in Dragon Age, highly recommend that as well. But I think that's going to do it for us here. Friends, Blizzard Watch is made possible due to your generous contributions at patreon.com/BlizzardWatch. Your continued support means that this podcast site and community is able to thrive and grow. Blizzard Watch supporters enjoy exclusive benefits like early access to the podcast, a better chance at having your question answered on our podcast, or the Q&A and answer set experience. We haven't done this in a while, but I do think that this is actually something that is relevant here. You can still sign up for Audible when you get the opportunity. I believe our code still works, which is just blizzardwatch.com/audible. I highly recommend that if you don't want to read the books, maybe check out Audible and get those books on there because they are available there. They are read. I forgot who does the voice, does the actual reading. But again, it can't hurt. You get a free audiobook with a 30-day free trial. And if you're so inclined, definitely at least listen to The Stolen Throne. It is an absolutely phenomenal good time. And then parting, if you have questions for this or any of our podcasts, send those in. You can send them into podcast@blizzardwatch.com, specify the show that it is for in the subject line, and then add any special pronunciations of your name. If you want to hit us up on Discord, you can comment or send us comments on the Q and Podcast Questions channel. If you are a Patreon subscriber, you can send us to the Patreon Q and Podcast Questions channel, where we tend to look there first as a way of saying thank you for helping us keep the lights on. And you can also message us directly through Patreon as well. But with that, folks, I do want to thank you for listening to us on this Dragon Age journey as we went backwards through time. And I do want to thank Liz for joining us on this journey and offering her insight. Thank you very much.
I wasn't going to let you do these without me. I'm just saying.